In a universe where a father's love turns into a brutal betrayal, Omni-Man's horrifying mission to conquer Earth leaves scars that will never heal. A teenager, Mark Grayson, inherits the powers of his Viltrumite lineage, but as Invincible, he faces impossible choices, fighting not just alien invaders, but his own blood. The Guardians of the Globe are shattered, resurrected, and tested beyond their limits, while ruthless villains like Angstrom Levy-Tear open the fabric of reality itself, threatening to destroy all timelines. Meanwhile, the immortal enemies of Earth grow ever stronger, led by the cold and calculating Thrag, the villainous mastermind of the Viltrumite Empire. This universe is filled with the constant clash of morality, power, and the unbearable cost of heroism. With betrayals, shocking deaths, and the weight of legacy bearing down on every hero, the Invincible universe is a place where nothing is ever as it seems, and the price of saving the world might just be too high. Mark Grayson had always been a normal teenager. Well, as normal as you can be when your father is the world's most powerful superhero. He lived in a suburban neighborhood, going to school, playing basketball with friends, and dealing with the usual teenage drama. However, unlike most kids, Mark had always known that something was different about his family. His father, Nolan Grayson, was no ordinary man. He was Omni-Man, a seemingly indestructible hero with immense strength, speed, and the ability to fly. He was a living legend, revered by the world, and Mark admired him deeply. From an early age, Mark had been aware of his father's power, but he had no idea that he was destined for greatness himself. As Mark grew older, there were subtle signs that he was beginning to develop powers. He was faster, stronger, and more agile than most other kids his age, but he didn't think much of it at first. Then the change came. One day, when Mark was 17 years old, the moment that would shape his destiny arrived. It was a normal afternoon when he first experienced the full extent of his powers. He was at school, and as he walked through the halls, a strange sensation ran through him, a tingling in his body that he couldn't ignore. Something in the air had shifted, and he suddenly felt an overwhelming rush of strength. It wasn't just a feeling, it was real. Mark was more powerful than ever before. He had always suspected he was different, but now he knew for certain. His reflexes had sharpened, his senses heightened, and his body seemed to pulse with raw energy. It was the first time he truly understood that he was more than just a normal teenager. He was meant for something far greater. That evening, as Mark tried to come to terms with his newfound abilities, he found himself standing on the roof of his house, staring up at the night sky. It was a familiar scene, but tonight, everything felt different. There was an undeniable pull within him, something he couldn't explain. He felt the weight of destiny on his shoulders. His father, Nolan, had been keeping a secret from him. Nolan was not just Earth's protector. He was part of a larger, far more powerful race of aliens known as the Viltrumites. They were an ancient, advanced species with nearly godlike strength and long lifespans. Nolan had come to Earth on a mission to prepare it for the Viltrumite Empire, but what Mark didn't know at the time was that this mission would ultimately lead to a brutal, violent conflict between father and son. When Nolan finally revealed the truth to Mark, it was like the Earth shifted beneath him. His father was not just a superhero. He was part of an empire bent on conquering worlds. Mark had inherited the same powers, and his destiny was sealed. He wasn't just a kid with extraordinary abilities. He was a member of an alien race that had the power to change the course of history. In that moment, everything Mark thought he knew about his father, about the world, and about himself was shattered. Nolan's true intentions were far darker than Mark could have ever imagined. His father had been sent to Earth not to protect it, but to prepare it for eventual conquest. The Viltrumite Empire had a brutal, cold ideology, survival of the fittest, and Mark was now part of that fate. This revelation would be the catalyst for Mark's transformation into Invincible. He didn't want to believe it at first. He didn't want to accept that his father, the man he had looked up to his whole life, was capable of such a horrific betrayal. But it didn't take long for the truth to sink in. Mark's first test as Invincible came quickly. Nolan, in his role as Omni-Man, brutally attacked the Guardians of the Globe, Earth's premier superhero team. He killed them all in a bloody, merciless battle. This act of violence was a devastating shock to the world, and to Mark. He had seen his father as a hero, but now the truth was undeniable. Nolan was a weapon, a conqueror, and he was willing to destroy anyone standing in the way of the Viltrumite mission, even if that meant killing Mark's beloved team, the Guardians of the Globe. As the world mourned the loss of its greatest protectors, Mark struggled with his new identity. How could he be a hero when everything he had been taught about heroism was now in question? His relationship with his father became strained beyond repair, and Mark realized he had a choice. He could follow in Nolan's footsteps, become part of the Viltrumite Empire, and conquer worlds, or he could fight against everything his father stood for and protect Earth, no matter the cost. The first few months of Mark's journey as Invincible were filled with confusion and pain. He fought villains, saved lives, and honed his powers, but nothing could prepare him for the emotional toll that came with living up to his father's legacy. He was torn between his love for Nolan and his sense of responsibility to Earth. Each day, Mark found himself questioning who he truly was and what he stood for. He began to surround himself with other young heroes, including Adam Eve, Rexplode, and Duplicate, who would become his closest allies and friends. Together, they formed a new team to fight against the rising threats to Earth. While Mark struggled with his emotions and doubts, he became increasingly aware of the immense power within him. He was stronger than almost anyone on Earth, faster than a speeding bullet, and nearly invulnerable. But with that power came a heavy burden. The weight of his father's legacy, the legacy of the Viltrumite Empire, was a constant shadow hanging over him. Mark's journey was not just about learning to control his powers. It was about finding his own path, separate from the legacy of his father. It was about forging his own identity as a hero, even when the world's expectations, and even his own blood, tried to pull him into a darker fate. He was invincible, yes, but the true challenge lay in whether he could hold onto his humanity in a universe full of violence, betrayal, and the temptation of ultimate power. As Mark's powers grew stronger, so did the threats he faced. The world's most dangerous villains, the remnants of the Guardians of the Globe, and even the alien races that Nolan had once protected all began to test Invincible's resolve. Yet, through it all, one thing remained true. Mark Grayson was no longer just a boy living in the shadow of his father. He was a hero in his own right, with the power to change the fate of the world, if he could survive the consequences of his choices. Mark's journey from a normal teenager to the hero Invincible is one of personal growth, sacrifice, and the struggle to define himself in a universe where family, power, and responsibility are constantly in conflict. The Viltrumite Empire was a force unlike anything the universe had ever seen. It was a vast, brutal, and ancient civilization founded on one principle: survival of the fittest. At the core of their belief was an unwavering commitment to the idea that strength and dominance were the only true values worth living for. As a race, the Viltrumites were physically superior to nearly every other species in the universe. They were faster, stronger, and more resilient than almost any other beings, capable of surviving in harsh conditions that would obliterate lesser creatures. The origins of the Viltrumite Empire were as ancient as the stars themselves. They had begun as a small, primitive species on a far-flung planet, struggling for survival. But the Viltrumites had a drive that set them apart, an ambition to conquer and control. Their evolutionary path, shaped by intense natural selection, resulted in a race of beings who were not just physically formidable, but also intensely intelligent and ruthlessly efficient. The Viltrumites believed that only the strong deserved to rule, and their society revolved around this belief. Their homeworld, Viltrum, was a harsh and unforgiving place. The atmosphere was thin, and the planet's gravity was much stronger than Earth's. It was an environment that forced its inhabitants to become stronger just to survive. The Viltrumites' physical abilities had been shaped by their need to adapt to these conditions, and as they evolved, their powers grew exponentially. They could lift massive objects with ease, fly at incredible speeds, and heal from injuries that would cripple any other species. Viltrum's brutal environment also gave rise to the Viltrumites' harsh social structure. They were a warrior race, and every individual was expected to prove their worth through combat. The strongest Viltrumites were elevated to positions of power, while the weak were discarded. This relentless drive for strength led to the formation of an empire that spanned across the galaxy. The Viltrumites were not interested in diplomacy or peaceful coexistence. They were conquerors, and their mission was simple: to dominate and control as many worlds as possible. The Viltrumite Empire was built on the back of conquest. The Viltrumites would travel from world to world, overthrowing weaker civilizations and establishing their rule. They didn't simply take over these worlds. They exterminated their inhabitants if they were deemed weak or unworthy. The strong were enslaved, and the weak were left to perish. The Viltrumites had no qualms about eradicating entire species to further their empire's expansion. They believed that only through strength could the universe be truly perfected. But the Viltrumites were not mindless killers. They were a calculating, intelligent race, and they understood that conquering the universe was not a simple task. They knew that to maintain control, they needed to make alliances and manipulate others. This led to the creation of a complex political structure within the empire. The Viltrumite leadership was composed of the strongest and most cunning individuals who worked to ensure the empire's dominance. At the top of the Viltrumite hierarchy was the Viltrumite Emperor, the ultimate authority in the empire. The emperor's role was not just to lead the empire's armies, but to maintain the balance of power among the various factions within the empire. Beneath the emperor were the elite warriors, who were entrusted with the most important missions and responsibilities. These warriors were the epitome of Viltrumite strength and power, and they were revered by their people. Among the most infamous of the Viltrumite warriors was Thrag, a ruthless and calculating leader who would come to embody the true nature of the Viltrumite Empire. Thrag's rise to power was not a simple one. It was marked by a series of brutal and bloody battles that tested his strength and cunning. Thrag was not only physically powerful, but he was also a master of strategy. His ability to manipulate others, outthink his enemies, and make ruthless decisions made him one of the most dangerous Viltrumites of all time. In addition to the elite warriors, the Viltrumite Empire also employed a vast network of soldiers, spies, and agents to carry out its will. These soldiers were bred for one purpose: to fight and conquer. They were trained from a young age to be ruthless and efficient, and they were given the best equipment and technology the Empire had to offer. The Viltrumites were not just physically strong, they were technologically advanced, with the ability to build weapons and devices that could obliterate entire planets. However, despite their overwhelming power, the Viltrumites were not invincible. They were a deeply flawed race, driven by their own arrogance and sense of superiority. They believed that their way was the only way, and they saw every other species as inferior. This hubris would eventually lead to their downfall. The turning point for the Viltrumite Empire came when they encountered the inhabitants of Earth. Earth was a relatively primitive planet, with a population that lacked the advanced technology or military might of other civilizations. But what Earth had that made it valuable to the Viltrumites was its strategic location in the galaxy. Earth was a resource-rich planet, and it was seen as an ideal conquest. The Viltrumites believed that by conquering Earth, they could secure their empire's dominance in the universe. Nolan Grayson, a Viltrumite warrior, was sent to Earth as part of this grand plan. He was tasked with preparing Earth for Viltrumite conquest, slowly weakening the planet's defenses and setting the stage for eventual invasion. Nolan's mission was clear: infiltrate Earth, gain the trust of its people, and wait for the right moment to strike. But as Nolan spent more time on Earth, he began to develop feelings for its people, especially for his wife, Debbie, and his son, Mark. Nolan's mission became complicated by his growing attachment to his family, and he struggled with the conflict between his duty to the Viltrumite Empire and his love for Earth. Nolan's internal struggle was emblematic of the deeper flaws within the Viltrumite Empire. The Viltrumites were a race built on the idea of strength and dominance, but they lacked compassion, empathy, and understanding. They saw themselves as the pinnacle of evolution, but they failed to see the value of the things they destroyed, the lives they took, the cultures they obliterated. This inability to understand the value of life outside their own race would ultimately be their undoing. The invasion of Earth, carried out by Nolan Grayson, better known as Omni-Man, was not a sudden event. It had been a long time in the making, a meticulously orchestrated mission that had its roots in the distant past. Nolan's plan was to prepare Earth for the Viltrumite Empire, a vast, galactic force that sought to conquer every planet in its path. But the invasion, when it finally came, was nothing like anyone had imagined. It was a betrayal of unimaginable proportions, one that shattered the world's trust in its greatest hero. For years, Nolan had been living on Earth under the guise of a protector. He was the world's strongest and most revered superhero, Omni-Man, the symbol of hope and justice. No one knew that he was an alien invader, nor did they know of his true purpose on Earth. Nolan had been sent by the Viltrumite Empire to prepare the planet for eventual conquest. His mission was to weaken Earth's defenses, eliminate any powerful opposition, and eventually make the planet ripe for Viltrumite domination. Yet, over the years, Nolan had grown attached to Earth and its people, forming a family with his human wife, Debbie, and having a son, Mark. It was a bond that complicated his mission, but that bond also began to blur Nolan's once clear commitment to the Viltrumite Empire. Mark, Nolan's son, was born with powers unlike any other human on Earth. While he inherited his father's strength, speed, and ability to fly, he was unaware of the true nature of his heritage until much later. Nolan had hoped to raise Mark as a human, to protect him from the brutal reality of the Viltrumite Empire and their violent way of life. But as Mark reached his teenage years and his powers began to manifest, Nolan knew that the time had come to tell him the truth. The tipping point arrived one fateful day when Nolan finally revealed his true purpose to Mark. He explained to his son that he was not just a superhero. He was a Viltrumite, and Earth was to be assimilated into the Viltrumite Empire. Mark, still reeling from this revelation, couldn't fathom what his father was saying. He had spent his whole life idolizing him, believing that Nolan was a hero who had been protecting Earth out of genuine love for humanity. To hear that his father's love for Earth was merely a facade was too much for him to accept. Nolan, seeing the confusion and the anger in his son's eyes, knew there was no going back. His mission was now clear. Mark had to join him, or he would stand in the way of the Viltrumite conquest. Nolan's first major act of betrayal was swift and devastating. He turned on the Guardians of the Globe, the world's premier superhero team, and murdered them all in cold blood. The attack was a brutal display of power, leaving no room for mercy. Omni-Man wiped out the team with little effort, showing the world just how terrifyingly strong he was. The death of the Guardians sent shockwaves through Earth, leaving the planet vulnerable and in disarray. The world's faith in its protectors was shattered, and people were left questioning who they could trust. But this wasn't just a massacre for the sake of violence. It was part of Nolan's larger plan. The Guardians had been the last line of defense against the Viltrumite Empire, and their elimination was necessary for the invasion to proceed. The world's heroes were now decimated, and no one could stand in the way of Nolan's true mission. As the dust settled from the attack, Nolan stood over the fallen heroes, having killed them with little more than a thought. It was a chilling and horrific sight, and it marked the beginning of Earth's downfall. The aftermath of the Guardians' deaths was an incredibly difficult time for Mark. He struggled with the realization that his father, the man he had trusted and loved, was responsible for the slaughter of Earth's greatest defenders. Mark's world had been turned upside down, and the loss of the Guardians was just the beginning of a much larger, much darker conflict. With Earth's protectors gone, Mark now had to face the truth of what his father had become. Omni-Man was not a hero. He was an invader, a conqueror, and he was willing to do whatever it took to prepare Earth for the Viltrumite Empire. In the days that followed, Mark, now donning the mantle of Invincible, struggled to comprehend his father's motives. Nolan had raised him, loved him, and guided him in many ways. Mark had always looked up to him, believing that Omni-Man was a symbol of justice. But now everything had changed. His father's actions were unexplainable, and Mark was forced to confront the harsh reality that he was standing in opposition to the very person who had given him life. It was a battle of emotions, a clash of ideals, and a crisis of identity. Nolan, meanwhile, was unwavering in his commitment to the Viltrumite Empire. He didn't hesitate to explain to Mark that the destruction of Earth's defenses was necessary for the greater good. The Viltrumite Empire's mission was to conquer and unite the galaxy under one rule, and Earth was just one of many worlds that would eventually fall under their control. To Nolan, Earth's eventual subjugation was inevitable. It was a part of the Viltrumite vision, a vision that he had accepted long ago. But Mark, still clinging to the ideals of heroism and justice, could not accept his father's reasoning. He believed that Earth deserved to remain free, that humanity had its own worth, its own future to protect. The conflict between father and son came to a head in a brutal and heartbreaking battle. Nolan, as Omni-Man, clashed with Mark, trying to force his son to understand the truth of the Viltrumite cause. He attacked Mark with everything he had, his strength, his speed, and his vast experience in combat. Mark, struggling to process the betrayal, fought back with all his might, but he was no match for his father's immense power. Omni-Man's attacks were merciless, and it quickly became clear that Mark was fighting against more than just a father. He was fighting against the cold, unfeeling ideology of the Viltrumite Empire. The battle between the two was a clash of ideologies as much as it was a physical fight. Nolan tried to break Mark, both mentally and physically, showing him the futility of resistance. He told Mark that humanity was weak, that Earth's people were not worthy of protection. Nolan saw his actions as necessary, an unavoidable consequence of the Viltrumite mission. But Mark refused to accept this twisted view of the universe. He fought for Earth, for the people he loved, and for the future that his father was so willing to destroy. The fight raged on, each blow more devastating than the last, until Mark's body was broken and bloodied. But even in the face of overwhelming power, Mark did not back down. The Guardians of the Globe were Earth's premier superhero team, the planet's first line of defense against the countless threats that loomed just beyond the stars. Their members were chosen for their exceptional powers, unwavering dedication, and years of experience. They were seen as the ultimate protectors, standing together against any force that might endanger humanity. Each member was a symbol of strength, and hope in a world that often teetered on the edge of chaos. But beneath the surface, the Guardians' team dynamic was far from perfect, and they faced challenges that were as internal as they were external. At the helm of the Guardians stood the team's leader, a formidable figure known as Immortal. His name alone commanded respect. Immortal was an ancient hero, a being who had fought in countless battles over centuries and had the experience to match his unparalleled strength. With his near immortality and vast combat experience, Immortal was considered the undisputed champion of the team. His role as the leader was vital, not only because of his raw power but because of the trust and loyalty he commanded among his teammates. Alongside him was War Woman, a fierce and skilled warrior whose combat abilities were on par with the very best. She was known for her courage in battle and her unshakable resolve. War Woman had trained her entire life to fight for justice, and she carried that dedication with her on every mission. She was a critical part of the team, and her loyalty to the Guardians was unquestionable. Then there was Martian Man, a telepathic alien who had come to Earth from Mars to help protect humanity. He had a quiet, reserved demeanor, but his powers were immense. His ability to read minds and manipulate others' thoughts made him a valuable asset to the Guardians, especially when dealing with threats that required a more cerebral approach. Despite his calm nature, Martian Man's powers were not to be underestimated. His deep connection to his home planet also gave him a unique perspective on the fate of humanity, which fueled his desire to protect Earth from harm. Green Ghost, a heroine with the ability to become invisible and intangible, was another key member of the team. Her powers made her an invaluable reconnaissance asset, allowing her to gather intelligence and strike from the shadows. She was known for her cunning and tactical brilliance, able to outmaneuver opponents before they even knew she was there. Green Ghost was often the eyes and ears of the Guardians, helping the team prepare for any potential threats with her stealth and intelligence. The team also included Duplicate, a quirky and resourceful hero who could create multiple copies of herself. Though she was not as physically powerful as some of the other Guardians, her ability to overwhelm enemies with sheer numbers made her an unpredictable and dangerous force. Duplicate's playful nature masked the seriousness with which she approached her role in the team, and she often brought a much-needed sense of levity to the otherwise serious dynamic of the Guardians. Finally, there was the powerhouse known as the Immortal Successor, who was a force of nature. The strength of this being could not be underestimated, and they were revered among the Guardians as one of the most unstoppable forces on Earth. Their role was vital in keeping the team together and facing the ever-growing threats that Earth faced. Together, these heroes formed a cohesive and formidable team, one that could face any challenge thrown their way. They were the embodiment of Earth's hope and protection, and they had worked together for years, building a reputation that made them beloved by the public. However, as with any team, there were cracks in the foundation, and the Guardians were not immune to the pressures of both their individual personalities and the secrets they kept. One of the most notable tensions within the Guardians was the issue of leadership. Immortal, despite his great power, had not always been the most approachable leader. His stoic and often distant nature made it difficult for him to connect with his teammates on a personal level, and some members of the team felt that his leadership style, while effective in battle, lacked the emotional intelligence needed to truly unify them. There were whispers of dissent among the ranks, and some members began to question whether Immortal was the right person to lead them through the ever-growing threats they faced. The Guardians of the Globe were also constantly at odds with the idea of balancing their personal lives and responsibilities with their duty to Earth. Many of them had families or ties to other communities, and the strain of balancing those relationships with the demands of being a superhero was not easy. This tension led to occasional disputes and miscommunication within the team, which, though minor at the time, contributed to the cracks in their unity. Despite these challenges, the Guardians remained steadfast in their mission to protect Earth. But their world would soon be turned upside down, when their biggest challenge came not from a supervillain or alien invasion, but from the very person they had trusted most, Omni-Man, the most powerful hero of them all. Omni-Man, a member of the Viltrumite Empire, had been living among the Guardians as one of their own for years. No one knew his true origins, or the true purpose of his presence on Earth. They knew him as a hero, as a powerful ally in their fight for justice. Mark Grayson, Nolan's son, had grown up idolizing him as a role model, and the entire world had put its faith in the seemingly indestructible Omni-Man. But unbeknownst to the Guardians, Omni-Man had an agenda that extended far beyond Earth's protection. His true mission was to soften Earth for Viltrumite domination, and in his eyes, the Guardians were a massive obstacle in his way. For Nolan, the Guardians represented the last remnants of Earth's resistance to the Viltrumite cause. As part of his dark plan to bring Earth into the fold of the Viltrumite Empire, Nolan made the fateful decision to eliminate them in the most brutal and final way possible. In a single, shocking moment, Nolan turned against the Guardians, betraying his longtime allies in a violent act of destruction. With ruthless precision, he attacked each member of the team, wiping them out one by one. Immortal was the first to fall, his body crushed in a single bone-shattering blow. War Woman was next, her strength no match for the overwhelming might of Omni-Man. The death of the Guardians of the Globe, and the horrifying revelation that Omni-Man, the once revered hero, was a ruthless agent of the Viltrumite Empire, had changed everything. The entire world was left reeling, unable to comprehend the brutal betrayal that had unfolded before them. But among the chaos, there was one who had to rise above it all, the son of Omni-Man, Mark Grayson, the one who would come to be known as Invincible. Mark had always admired his father, Nolan, seeing him as the ideal hero, the embodiment of strength and virtue. Growing up, Mark had always dreamed of becoming a hero like his father, fighting for justice and protecting the world. But when he discovered the truth, that his father's mission was to conquer Earth, and that his mother had been unaware of the destruction he had planned, the ground beneath Mark's feet was ripped away. The man he had looked up to, the man he thought of as a paragon of goodness, was nothing more than a cold-hearted invader from a brutal empire. For Mark, the revelation hit harder than anything else. It wasn't just the loss of the Guardians, or the fact that Earth was now under threat from an empire of superpowered conquerors. It was the realization that his entire upbringing had been a lie. His father, the man who had taught him to fight, to be strong, had done so with the intent of turning Mark into the perfect weapon for the Viltrumite cause. His father had intended for Mark to join the Empire and help in its conquest of Earth. That had always been the plan. Nolan had never been the protector Mark had believed him to be. The emotional turmoil that Mark faced was immense. In addition to losing the Guardians, he was now burdened with the weight of his father's actions and the impending threat of the Viltrumites. In that moment, Mark's life was changed irrevocably. He was forced to take on a mantle he was not prepared for, to become the hero his world so desperately needed, Invincible. Mark had already begun his journey as a hero long before the death of the Guardians. He had inherited his father's powers, gaining super strength, enhanced speed, durability, and the ability to fly. These powers had manifested during his teenage years, and Mark had used them to protect his city, but he was still very much learning the ropes. His first days as Invincible were filled with awkward encounters and mishaps, as he tried to balance being a regular teenager and a hero. His actions were often reckless, and he still lacked the experience to properly assess the severity of situations, resulting in mistakes and near misses. But he was determined to be better. However, after the loss of the Guardians, Mark could no longer afford to be the naive, inexperienced hero he had once been. He was forced to grow up quickly, and in doing so, he became more than just a teenager with powers. He became a symbol of hope, the new face of heroism, even as he struggled with his personal grief and confusion. In the aftermath of the Guardian's death, Mark's mother, Debbie, was devastated. She had lost her friends, but more than that, she had lost the man she had married, the man who had been the father of her son. Nolan's betrayal tore her apart, and she became withdrawn, unable to cope with the truth of her husband's actions. Mark, too, struggled with his emotions, unsure of how to process his feelings about his father's betrayal, while also trying to come to terms with the responsibilities that now weighed heavily on him. The task of protecting the world, of stepping into the shoes of the Guardians, was not one he had ever been prepared for. But Mark was not alone in this fight. As Invincible, he had already formed relationships with a number of other heroes, some of whom would prove to be invaluable allies in his journey. Among them was Adam Eve, a fellow young hero who could manipulate matter at a molecular level. Adam Eve, whose real name was Samantha Eve Wilkins, had been fighting for justice in her own way long before she met Mark. She had also experienced loss, and as the two began to work together, they formed a bond that grew deeper over time. Adam Eve was the emotional anchor Mark needed as he navigated the treacherous waters of his new role as Invincible. Despite the emotional turbulence, Mark fought on. The world needed him, and with every fight, every battle, he grew stronger, more focused. He honed his skills, learning to think strategically and understand the true cost of being a hero. He began to understand what it truly meant to protect humanity, and that, while he might not have had the experience of the older heroes, he still had something they didn't. He had the will to push forward, no matter how difficult the path might be. However, the external challenges were just as daunting as the internal ones. The rise of Invincible was met with the rise of new enemies, some old, some new, each more dangerous than the last. The first major test for Mark came with the arrival of the Maulers, a pair of brilliant but twisted scientists who had an insatiable desire for power. They created genetically enhanced super soldiers, monstrous beings capable of wreaking havoc on Earth. These super soldiers were a deadly threat, and Mark had to step up and confront them, using his skills and determination to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Through each battle, Mark's resolve strengthened. But it was not just the physical challenges that he faced. It was the emotional ones as well. With every victory, he had to wrestle with the knowledge that his father, Omni-Man, was still out there, and he would inevitably return. Mark knew that the ultimate showdown between father and son was unavoidable. What he didn't know, however, was how much worse it would get before that final confrontation. The weight of the Viltrumite Empire's invasion, the possibility of Earth being wiped out, was always looming over him, pressing down on his every action. And then there was the burden of his secret identity. Mark had to keep his identity as Invincible hidden from his mother, a constant source of inner conflict. Debbie, still devastated by Nolan's actions, could never know that her son had taken up his father's mantle, fighting to protect the world from the very threat Nolan had been sent to bring. The secrecy weighed heavily on Mark, but he had no choice but to continue the ruse, even as the lies piled up. As time went on, Mark's journey as Invincible became a relentless cycle of battles and personal growth. He fought against villain after villain, some of whom were deeply personal, while others represented the overwhelming forces of the Viltrumite Empire, each one pushing him to his limits. He learned that being a hero wasn't about glory or fame. It was about sacrifice, pain, and the constant struggle to do what was right. The Coalition of Planets was a vast intergalactic alliance formed by various species and civilizations, united under a common goal: to protect the universe from the Viltrumite Empire. This organization was born out of the desperation felt by countless worlds that had been conquered, enslaved, or destroyed by the Viltrumites. The Viltrumite Empire, with its near-immortal and superpowered soldiers, represented an existential threat to every corner of the universe, and only through unity could any hope of survival exist. The Coalition was the last line of defense against the Viltrumite juggernaut, an organization of alien races that had been fighting a losing battle for years. The story of the Coalition of Planets begins with the realization that the Viltrumites were not just a threat to Earth, but to the entire universe. The Viltrumites had conquered countless worlds in their endless pursuit of domination, spreading throughout the stars, leaving behind a trail of destruction. With their superior strength, near immortality, and brutal tactics, the Viltrumites had eliminated or subjugated most civilizations they encountered. The Coalition had been formed in response to this, as a desperate attempt to stand against the inevitable tide of Viltrumite expansion. At the forefront of the Coalition stood a number of powerful and influential beings from across the galaxy, each representing a different species or race that had been affected by the Viltrumites in some way. Some of these beings were incredibly powerful in their own right, while others were simply desperate survivors looking for any way to push back against the tide of destruction. Among the Coalition's most prominent members were the likes of the Ragnars, a race of towering reptilian warriors, the Insectoid Blacks, who were known for their advanced technology and ruthless strategy, and the peaceful yet highly intelligent Six, whose scientific advancements had contributed greatly to the Coalition's efforts. As Earth's hero, Invincible, grew in strength and stature, he became a key figure in the Coalition's ongoing fight against the Viltrumites. The truth about the Viltrumites' plan for Earth was slowly revealed. The Viltrumites had set their sights on Earth as the next step in their intergalactic expansion. Their plan was to infiltrate the planet, weaken its defenses, and eventually turn it into a Viltrumite stronghold. Nolan, Invincible's father, had been sent to Earth to prepare the planet for this inevitable conquest, but his failure to corrupt Mark, his son, would become a significant obstacle for the Viltrumites' plans. The Coalition saw the potential for Earth to be a powerful ally in their fight against the Viltrumites, especially with Invincible at the helm. Earth, though relatively primitive in its technology compared to the more advanced civilizations of the galaxy, had a unique advantage. It was home to a number of powerful individuals, including Invincible himself, who possessed strength and abilities that rivaled those of the Viltrumites. The Coalition recognized that Earth's heroes, led by Invincible, could play a pivotal role in the defeat of the Viltrumites and, in turn, help secure the galaxy's future. The first steps toward a formal alliance between Earth and the Coalition were hesitant and filled with tension. While Invincible and his allies wanted to do everything in their power to protect Earth, they had to navigate the complexities of working with an intergalactic organization. The Coalition, despite its noble goal, was made up of countless different species and factions, each with its own motivations, values, and agendas. Trust was a precious commodity, and it would take time for Invincible and his team to learn how to work with these diverse allies. As the Coalition's operations expanded, Earth became a key player in the intergalactic war against the Viltrumites. While the Viltrumites continued their brutal campaign of conquest, destroying or subjugating planets across the galaxy, the Coalition fought back with what little resources they could muster. However, the scale of the Viltrumites' empire was vast, and the Coalition was always on the defensive, constantly trying to stave off the next attack while searching for any advantage they could gain. One of the most important developments in the Coalition's war against the Viltrumites came with the formation of a special task force, a team made up of some of the Coalition's most elite warriors. This group, led by Invincible, was charged with infiltrating Viltrumite strongholds and sabotaging their operations. This team was made up of a diverse array of beings, each with their own unique abilities and expertise. Some were formidable fighters, while others were experts in stealth or sabotage. Together, they represented the best chance the universe had at fighting back against the Viltrumites. One of the most significant characters to join Invincible's cause was Alan the Alien, a powerful and enigmatic being from a distant planet. Alan, a member of a species that had once been enslaved by the Viltrumites, became one of Invincible's closest allies. His powers were immense, and he had vast knowledge of the Viltrumite Empire, having once been part of their ranks before defecting. His first-hand knowledge of the Viltrumites, coupled with his impressive strength and combat skills, made him an invaluable ally in the fight against the Empire. As the task force embarked on its missions, they faced incredible challenges. The Viltrumites, despite their pride and arrogance, had been forced to adapt over time, refining their methods and strategies. They were a constant presence in the universe, and their military might was unmatched. The Coalition, while strong, was always outgunned and outnumbered, constantly facing new threats and obstacles that tested the resolve of every member. Despite these challenges, Invincible's leadership began to shine through. As he grew more comfortable in his role as a leader, he took on greater responsibility, learning how to command and inspire his team. Mark's evolution as both a hero and a leader mirrored the larger evolution of the Coalition of Planets. What had begun as a disparate group of frightened survivors gradually coalesced into a formidable force that was capable of taking on the Viltrumites in ways no one had thought possible. One of the most harrowing moments in the Coalition struggle came when they discovered the true extent of the Viltrumites' plans for the universe. The Viltrumites were not content with merely conquering planets. They sought to dominate entire galaxies, eradicating any race that was not fit to be part of their empire. They believed in survival of the fittest, and only the strongest species were allowed to survive under their rule. The Immortals' resurrection is a tale of vengeance, betrayal, and the unyielding will of one of Earth's most powerful heroes, a hero who has long since crossed the line between heroism and savagery. The Immortal, a member of the now-destroyed Guardians of the Globe, was once Earth's greatest defender, a being whose power rivaled that of the Viltrumites themselves. He was, at one point, the shining example of heroism, a protector who embodied the ideals of justice, integrity, and duty to the planet. However, as we would soon learn, the Immortal's fall from grace would be just as monumental as his rise, and his return would be nothing short of catastrophic. The first step in this story begins with the shocking and brutal death of the Guardians of the Globe, an event that had occurred at the hands of Omni-Man, Mark Grayson's father. In a shocking act of betrayal, Nolan Grayson, a Viltrumite warrior sent to Earth to conquer the planet, turned on his fellow heroes and mercilessly slaughtered the Guardians in a single, violent encounter. This brutal act set in motion a series of events that would forever alter the course of Earth's future. Among the fallen was the Immortal, who, despite his incredible strength and godlike powers, was no match for the brutal efficiency of Omni-Man. His body was left in a mangled heap, a symbol of the ruthless power that Nolan wielded. Earth's protectors had been defeated, and the planet was left vulnerable to an oncoming storm that no one could predict. What followed this massacre was a period of grief and confusion for Earth's remaining heroes. The death of the Immortal left a gaping hole in the world's defense, and without their strongest ally, the surviving members of the Guardians of the Globe struggled to keep their footing. However, despite the crushing loss, hope remained in the form of Invincible, Mark Grayson, who would soon rise as the planet's last defense. As Mark continued to fight his father and the threat that loomed over Earth, the story of the Immortals' resurrection began to unfold. The Immortals' return to life came not from any miraculous intervention, but from the intricate and disturbing operations of the secretive, often gruesome medical practices of the facility, a shadowy organization that had long been responsible for resurrecting fallen heroes. The facility had access to technology that could bring even the most shattered bodies back from the brink of death, and after his brutal murder at the hands of Omni-Man, the Immortal was no exception. His remains were carefully recovered and brought to the facility, where the team of scientists and doctors began the long and difficult process of reanimating him. The facility's methods were far from ethical, and the Immortal's resurrection was as violent as it was unnatural. His body, mangled and torn, was rebuilt piece by piece and brought back to life. However, when he awoke, It was not the same hero who had once stood proudly as Earth's champion. The immortal, now resurrected, was not only haunted by the trauma of his death, but also consumed by a burning rage. The knowledge that he had been betrayed by his own kind, by Omni-Man, his former ally, burned within him like a fire that could not be extinguished. The first sign that something was wrong came when the immortal awoke in the facility. His memories were fuzzy at first, disoriented by the shock of his own resurrection. It was not long before he realized the extent of his own disfigurement and the brutal betrayal that had been committed against him. His mind, clouded by the trauma of his death, began to fixate on the one thing that he could not let go of: vengeance. The immortal's desire for revenge against Omni-Man, the man who had killed him, began to consume him. It was no longer about heroism, justice, or protecting Earth. It was about punishing the man who had torn his life apart. Upon his revival, the immortal was reintroduced to the world as a hero once more, though it was clear to those who knew him that something had fundamentally changed. While his powers remained intact, his personality had shifted into something darker, more brutal. He no longer cared about protecting humanity, but rather about punishing those who had wronged him. His resurrection had given him a second chance at life, but it had also robbed him of the idealism that once made him a beloved hero. The immortal's path was now one of destruction. His first move after returning was to confront the man who had taken everything from him, Omni-Man. Mark, still trying to navigate his complex relationship with his father, found himself caught in the middle of a storm when the immortal arrived at the Grayson household, ready to exact his revenge. The two beings clashed in an epic battle that shook the earth to its core. What followed was a brutal fight, as the immortal, driven by pure rage, tore into Omni-Man with unrelenting fury. The two beings, whose powers had once made them the strongest of allies, now stood on opposite sides of a bloody conflict. The immortal's raw emotion, combined with his immense strength, made him a dangerous and unpredictable adversary. Omni-Man, despite his own power, was forced to contend with the fury of his former comrade. For Mark, this confrontation was a painful one. He knew that his father was a villain, a conqueror who had come to Earth to enslave humanity, but the bond of family ran deep. Watching the immortal, a man he had once looked up to as a symbol of heroism, turn into a vessel of pure rage and vengeance was heartbreaking. Mark was caught between his duty to stop his father and his empathy for a fallen hero who had once stood for everything good. The battle between Omni-Man and the immortal reached a terrifying crescendo, with each blow that struck rattling the very foundations of the earth. It seemed as though nothing could stop their destructive force, as the two titans fought with all their might. However, in the end, it was clear that the immortal's rage had clouded his judgment. His desire for vengeance had made him reckless, and he was ultimately unable to match the raw power and experience of Omni-Man, who had decades of combat under his belt. In the aftermath of the battle, the immortal was once again defeated, but this time he had been irrevocably changed. His thirst for revenge had consumed him, and while he may have been defeated in that fight, it was clear that he would never be the same. His resurrection had not brought back the man who once fought for justice. It had only unleashed a darker, more violent version of the hero. He would continue to play a role in the ongoing struggle for Earth's survival, but now as a force that would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. The Mauler twins, identical twins whose intellect and ambition make them formidable foes, were a constant and menacing presence in the world of Invincible. These two genius-level scientists, despite their brilliant minds and unyielding determination, would forever be tainted by their obsession with power and recognition, which often led them down dangerous and villainous paths. Their story is one of twisted ambition, scientific genius, and an unending thirst for superiority. a thirst that would repeatedly bring them into conflict with both Invincible and the other heroes of Earth. The Mauler twins were born as identical twins with a singular purpose: to make their mark on the world. From an early age, their vast intellects were apparent, with both boys showing exceptional promise in the fields of science, technology, and engineering. But their true genius was overshadowed by an insatiable hunger for recognition. While their brilliance made them a force to be reckoned with, their egos drove them to seek more than just success. They wanted to be immortalized in history, to be revered as the greatest minds the world had ever known. It was this thirst for recognition that ultimately led the Mauler twins down the path of villainy. Though their minds could have been used for good, they were consumed by a desire for power and control. Time and time again, they found themselves at odds with the established order, using their vast knowledge of science and technology to create increasingly dangerous weapons, schemes, and plans. They were not driven by a desire to conquer the world for the sake of domination. Instead, they sought to prove their genius, to prove that they were worthy of the acclaim and respect they believed they deserved. Their most infamous and recurring invention was their cloning technology. The Mauler twins were responsible for creating numerous clones of themselves, a process that allowed them to achieve a kind of immortality by continually replacing their bodies when one was inevitably destroyed. The ability to create these clones meant that the Maulers could continue their work, no matter how many times they were defeated. Each new clone retained the memories and knowledge of the original twins, making them an incredibly dangerous force, one that would never truly be gone. It was this ability to perpetuate themselves that made the Mauler twins a consistent and persistent threat to Earth and its heroes. Their first major appearance in the Invincible universe came when they targeted Mark Grayson, who was still adjusting to his role as Invincible. The Mauler twins were not necessarily interested in defeating Invincible in the traditional sense, but rather in proving that their intellect and creations were superior to the young hero's raw strength. Their plan was simple but effective. They created a series of powerful robotic minions and unleashed them on the city, hoping to draw Invincible into battle. These robots were armed with advanced weaponry and were more than capable of holding their own against the rookie hero. They posed a serious threat, and Invincible was forced to fight against the mechanical army to protect innocent lives. During this confrontation, the Mauler twins showed their true cunning, watching from the sidelines as their robots wreaked havoc. Their goal was not just to cause destruction, but to force Invincible to fight against an overwhelming force. By doing so, they hoped to test the young hero's abilities and see if he was truly worthy of the title of Invincible. What they didn't anticipate, however, was the sheer determination and resilience of Mark Grayson. Despite being outnumbered and overwhelmed, Invincible fought tirelessly to protect the city, using his strength and speed to take down the robots one by one. The battle culminated in a showdown between Invincible and the Mauler twins themselves. With their robots defeated, the Maulers engaged the hero in direct combat. Though they were not physically imposing, their scientific knowledge and mastery of technology made them formidable opponents. The Mauler twins had prepared for this moment, equipping themselves with powerful energy weapons and advanced armor. However, despite their preparations, they were no match for Invincible's raw strength and speed. Mark quickly overpowered the two scientists, defeating them and leaving them in the hands of the authorities. But the Mauler twins were far from finished. Their defeat at the hands of Invincible only fueled their desire to prove their superiority. They were not the kind of villains who would be deterred by a single failure. Instead, they took their defeat as a challenge, vowing to return stronger and more dangerous than before. Using their cloning technology, the Maulers began the process of creating new versions of themselves, each clone more dangerous and more determined than the last. Their obsession with creating the perfect clone would become their defining trait, and it would bring them into direct conflict with Invincible time and time again. One of the most significant moments in the Mauler twins story came when they used their cloning technology to create an army of clones of themselves. They were no longer content with merely being the smartest men in the room. Now, they wanted to be the most powerful. With an army of clones at their disposal, the Mauler twins launched a series of attacks against Invincible and his allies, hoping to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. The battle that followed was nothing short of chaotic, as Mark found himself fighting not just the original Mauler twins, but dozens of their clones as well. The Maulers' cloning technology allowed them to continually replenish their ranks, making it nearly impossible for Invincible to defeat them once and for all. No matter how many clones Mark defeated, there would always be more, and the Mauler twins' obsession with perfection pushed them to constantly improve their creations. The clones they created were stronger, faster, and more intelligent than the last batch, making them increasingly difficult to combat. Throughout this time, the Mauler twins continued to be a thorn in the side of Invincible and the other heroes of Earth. Their schemes were often elaborate and complex, relying on their scientific prowess to create deadly machines and clones to carry out their plans. They were not driven by a sense of morality or a desire to see the world burn. Rather, they were motivated by a need to prove that their genius was unmatched. This obsession with proving their intellectual superiority was the driving force behind much of their villainy. They did not seek wealth or power for the sake of power. Instead, they wanted the world to recognize them as the greatest minds in existence. The Flaxans were a highly advanced alien race from a dimension far removed from Earth, and their invasion would come to be one of the first true tests of Invincible's ability to defend Earth from extraterrestrial threats. Their civilization, although technologically sophisticated, was steeped in war, driven by an endless desire to expand their reach and conquer new worlds. But their invasion of Earth wasn't just a typical hostile takeover. It was the beginning of something much more dangerous, something that would introduce a new dimension of threat to the young hero's world. The first appearance of the Flaxans occurred without any warning. One moment, everything seemed peaceful, and the next, a tear in the fabric of space and time opened above the city. It wasn't a typical alien ship descending, nor were there any traditional warning signs of an invasion. Instead, a massive rift in reality itself appeared in the sky, and from that rift, Flaxan soldiers began to descend. Their invasion wasn't aimed at subtlety or negotiation. There was no attempt at diplomacy. They landed in the heart of a major city, deploying their forces with precision and overwhelming force. The Flaxan soldiers were nothing like the typical alien invaders one might expect. They were humanoid in shape, yet their bodies were noticeably different from humans in several ways. Their skin had an almost reptilian quality to it, with scales running down their arms and legs, and their eyes were large and multifaceted, giving them a predatory look. Their technology was far more advanced than Earth's, as they wielded energy-based weapons and equipment that outclassed anything humanity had ever developed. They had the power to obliterate tanks, buildings, and entire structures with ease. Their energy weapons weren't simply guns. They were capable of bending reality itself, manipulating matter and energy in ways that Earth's heroes could hardly comprehend. Mark Grayson, still coming into his own as Invincible, was thrust into the chaos of their invasion. He arrived on the scene with little preparation, his mind racing to figure out how to handle this unprecedented threat. The battle was unlike any he had faced before. Invincible could easily handle street-level criminals or minor supervillains, but these were not typical opponents. The Flaxans were organized, strategic, and relentless in their pursuit of conquest. They weren't just causing destruction for destruction's sake. They had a clear goal in mind: to invade and take over Earth. The Flaxan soldiers quickly swarmed the city, their weapons cutting through anything in their path, from military forces to civilians. Invincible dove into the fray, launching himself at the nearest group of Flaxans, but he was met with fierce resistance. Their soldiers were fast and efficient, and despite his strength and speed, Mark found himself overwhelmed by their numbers and firepower. The Flaxans didn't flinch when faced with his attacks. They simply adapted, retreating when necessary and regrouping to strike again with more precision. Despite the overwhelming nature of the Flaxan assault, Invincible fought tooth and nail to protect Earth's people. He tore through the alien soldiers with brutal force, using his strength to send them flying across the city. But it quickly became apparent that the invaders were not just a simple force of brute strength. They were tactical in nature, communicating with one another, coordinating attacks, and retreating when necessary to regroup. Their relentless waves of soldiers seemed endless, and it was clear that Mark would have to outlast them if Earth was to survive. Then came a turning point in the battle, one that made it clear how much more dangerous this invasion was. It wasn't just an army of soldiers, it was a multidimensional invasion. The Flaxans weren't just attacking Earth in a typical manner. They were coming from another dimension, and the very nature of their invasion created strange temporal anomalies in the fabric of reality. As Mark battled the Flaxans, he noticed something strange happening. The battlefield began to shift. The Flaxans weren't just from a distant planet, they were from a different version of reality, and their presence was causing time to distort in the area around them. It became evident that the Flaxans' invasion was tied to their ability to manipulate dimensions and time itself. As they fought on Earth, the very structure of reality seemed to warp around them. Time would stretch and distort. Seconds felt like hours, and hours seemed to pass in mere minutes. This strange time dilation effect was disorienting not just for Invincible, but for everyone involved. What was even more terrifying was the realization that the Flaxan soldiers could not only manipulate time in localized areas, but could also travel between dimensions at will. They weren't simply invaders from another world. They were invaders from another time and space, making their assault more dangerous than anything Mark had ever encountered. With the invasion in full swing, Mark fought with every ounce of his strength. Yet, despite his determination, he was caught off guard when a sudden wave of Flaxan soldiers attacked him all at once. Their weapons, seemingly designed to neutralize the very fabric of time, proved to be a devastating counter to Mark's abilities. The moment they unleashed their weaponry on Invincible, he felt time itself slow down, making it harder for him to react to their oncoming blows. He was struck by one of their energy blasts, which sent him crashing through buildings and knocking him out of the fray for a brief moment. It was during this break in the fighting that Mark realized something crucial. The Flaxans weren't just relying on their weapons and numbers. They were executing a highly organized invasion strategy. They weren't simply attacking blindly. They were infiltrating Earth in waves, with each new wave learning from the last. As they continued to attack, they began to anticipate Earth's defenses, adapting their strategies to counter anything Mark or any of Earth's defenders tried. Eventually, the fight became more than just about fighting the Flaxans. It became about understanding the nature of their invasion. The Flaxans' ability to manipulate time allowed them to establish a foothold on Earth, but Mark soon realized that their true goal was to establish a permanent presence by shifting Earth's timeline and dimension permanently. This revelation forced Invincible to reconsider his approach to the battle. It wasn't just about beating them, it was about preventing them from warping reality itself. The Viltrumite War began long before Mark Grayson, Invincible, could truly understand its magnitude. The seeds of this galactic conflict were sown deep in the very history of the Viltrumite Empire, a civilization of conquerors who spread across the universe, subjugating countless planets and civilizations. Mark, at this point in his journey, was beginning to come to terms with the truth of his father's legacy as Omni-Man. But nothing could prepare him for the oncoming storm, the war that would challenge everything he knew about his own family, his planet, and his place in the universe. The Viltrumites were a race of superhumans, genetically engineered for the singular purpose of conquest and expansion. They were physically superior to almost every other species, possessing incredible strength, near invulnerability, and the ability to fly. Their homeworld, Viltrum, was a harsh and unforgiving place, but it birthed a people driven by a singular ambition to dominate and control the universe. Omni-Man, Mark's father, was one of their most powerful soldiers, and his mission on Earth was one of the final steps in the Viltrumites' long campaign to spread their empire. At the core of this war was the Viltrumite race's desire to wipe out any potential threats to their dominance. Their empire had already conquered countless worlds, and Earth, being relatively isolated and underdeveloped, was the next logical target. But the Viltrumite Empire did not simply invade with armies and soldiers. They operated through subtlety and manipulation, infiltrating worlds with a single agent to soften them up for eventual domination. Omni-Man's arrival on Earth was no coincidence. He had been sent to pave the way for the Viltrumites' eventual invasion. However, the arrival of Invincible Mark Grayson changed everything. Mark, despite being the son of one of the Viltrumites' strongest agents, was different. He grew up on Earth, raised by his human mother, and developed his own sense of morality, one that rejected his father's violent mission. This internal conflict became the fulcrum of the Viltrumite War, a war not just for Earth's survival, but for the soul of Mark himself. The war kicked off with the realization that the Viltrumite Empire was not a distant threat. They were already here, embedded in the heart of Earth's defense. Omni-Man's betrayal had already shaken Mark to his core, but this was nothing compared to what was to come. The war began when the Viltrumites sent an army of their finest warriors to invade Earth directly. This army was unlike anything Mark had encountered before. These warriors were not just powerful, they were ruthless with decades, if not centuries, of battle experience. The invasion wasn't meant to be a drawn-out campaign. It was an overwhelming strike, one that aimed to crush any opposition swiftly and decisively. The first major battle took place when a group of Viltrumites descended upon Earth, led by Thrall, a massive and brutal warrior who had been sent to ensure Earth's submission. Thrall and his squad, which included some of the most powerful Viltrumites alive, clashed with Earth's remaining defenses. Invincible, alongside some of Earth's heroes, rushed to confront them, but the difference in power was staggering. The Viltrumites tore through the planet's defenders with ease, overwhelming them. Mark fought valiantly, but the sheer might of the Viltrumite soldiers pushed him to his limits. The brutality of the Viltrumites' invasion left no room for mercy. Cities were leveled, and entire populations were slaughtered without hesitation. The Viltrumites viewed the conquest of Earth as a formality, an easy victory that had been years in the making. But it wasn't just Earth's heroes who were thrown into the path of these invaders. Mark, torn between his loyalty to his father's race and his desire to protect his home, was thrust into an impossible position. With his father, Omni-Man, no longer a reliable ally, Mark had to rely on his own instincts and the help of Earth's remaining defenders. But the odds were stacked against them. The Viltrumites, having wiped out Earth's primary superheroes, were preparing for a final assault, one that would force Mark to take up his father's mantle and fight against his own people. But how could he face his own race when he had spent his entire life believing that they were the ones who were right? The war escalated when more and more Viltrumites were deployed, with each of them more powerful than the last. One of the key figures in this campaign was Conquest, a ruthless and nearly indestructible Viltrumite warrior. Conquest had been a constant threat to Mark since his first encounter with him, but now he became the Viltrumites' most prominent leader on Earth. Conquest was unlike the others. He had a personal vendetta against Mark, and his obsession with destroying the young hero became one of the defining aspects of the war. The battles between Mark and Conquest were brutal, each one more intense than the last. Mark was pushed to his breaking point. The sheer physicality of their clashes shook the earth itself. Conquest's relentless drive to crush Invincible pushed Mark to fight with everything he had. But no matter how hard he fought, Conquest kept coming back, every time more determined to finish what had been started. Their encounters weren't just battles. They were wars in themselves, stretching out over long periods of time, with each combatant drawing on every ounce of strength and willpower. As the war progressed, the Viltrumites began to show just how deep their influence reached. They weren't just conquering worlds, they were systematically wiping out any civilization that stood in their way, erasing entire histories and cultures from the universe. The Viltrumite Empire was not merely about power, it was about eradicating any form of resistance to their rule. And the more Earth's heroes fought back, the more brutal and relentless the Viltrumites became in their pursuit of domination. The most critical moment in the war came when Mark realized that this conflict was no longer just about Earth. It was about the survival of the universe itself. The Viltrumites had already conquered countless planets, and their invasion of Earth was part of a much larger plan to expand their empire across the galaxy. The war was not just a matter of defending Earth. It was a matter of ensuring that the Viltrumites did not dominate everything in their wake.